From ocean heat to sea level rise to glacial retreat, the number of broken environmental records is starting to sound like a broken record. To talk about the geopolitical challenges to changing that narrative, I'm joined by Rohan Patel. He's the former associate director on the Council of Environmental Quality under Barack Obama and until recently, vice president of global public policy at Tesla. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm also joined by Dr. Nicholas Seabrook. He is a political science professor at the University of North Florida, and he is leading a discussion with Rohan Patel tonight at UNF. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Rohan Patel, you recently left Tesla amid what was kind of the largest workforce layoff there, 14,000 jobs, 10% of the workforce, but you quit. Fair to say? Okay. What terms did you leave Tesla on? Fairly positive.
Oh, very. I had a fantastic, just an absolute great run. Was so proud to be a part of that growth in delivering and deploying a lot of clean energy, a lot more battery storage, and electric vehicles that are changing the face of transportation. So just loved my colleagues, loved the place, loved working there. I had a great time.
And at the same time that you left, there was a shift a little bit in the company's focus on implementing vehicles more cheaply that are battery powered and perhaps more competitively with vehicles like that from China. What do you think about the decision to shift away from that in terms of furthering global energy goals, like writ large?
Well, I don't know that I'm not sure I would frame it exactly how you just did, but your question is incredibly important as a general matter. So the competitive landscape vis-a-vis China, not just US China, Europe China, Southeast Asia China, India China, is defining the global landscape today. And that's on lots of different topic areas. The one that I think is going to be defining is this question of how we challenge and how we work on the climate crisis. And that entails many different aspects, from critical minerals to batteries to renewable energy deployment. And if the U.S. government and if the U.S. competitive landscape here in terms of our companies and institutions are not really fully focused on the most important solutions to efficiently deploy as well, we're going to be left behind.
So by that focus that our own government has, or perhaps other governments have, are you seeing their desire in being the source of, manufacturing of certain items like cars that are, battery powered with renewable sources? Is that getting in the way of cleaner energy? I mean, simply just trying to be protective of their own trade landscape.
Well, here's where I would go with that. You don't need to read between the lines when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. They set out a plan. They have a 5-year plan. They have a long-term plan and a long-term vision. And if you go back and look at what they have decided to invest in, how they've invested, how they've protected their supply chains, how they've built up this manufacturing capacity, it's not some secret. They've written it down. And what I think what's really important and that's at play right now is that China has built up a very significant manufacturing advantage, both in terms of efficiency, but much more importantly in terms of scale and size. And that size and scale is having a major impact on the industrial policy and the industrial landscape all over the globe. And that's just not on vehicles. That's on retail goods. That's on telecommunications. That's on everything. So this dynamic is playing out in a really big way and affecting our politics, affecting our policy, affecting all of the things that we have in terms of industrial policy in the United States. It's a big, 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 big deal.
But we would get much closer to a green planet, or energy sourced from green sources, if we were to, for instance, welcome Chinese-made electric vehicles and not be putting so much emphasis on being competitive in that market. Correct? I mean, that's a stumbling block for the United States. It's a stumbling block for the climate to say that we're going to try to build those vehicles better or cheaper instead of embracing the cheaper vehicles that are coming from a place like China.
You've asked the perfect question. this is exactly the right question to be asking, and it's the question that's being asked in the halls of Brussels and in Washington D.C. and everywhere else, which is to say, what is the difference that we need to be assessing between a national security imperative and a global climate imperative? And in many of these areas, let's take semiconductors as an example. Do we need to have in the United States enough of a manufacturing base that can cover the most critical defense related needs, transportation related needs, general infrastructure needs? Or are we okay being reliant on some allies, but also some adversaries? So that's the core question, and that's also the truth on things like electric vehicles. Do we need to have a friend shoring policy where we have the ability to, with the supply chain, with critical minerals, get things from Australia, from Canada, from Europe, from places where the U.S. has existing trade agreements, Chile, for example? Are those the kinds of places, or do we want to be reliant on China? I think the answer is quite clear for those of us that have been working in this space, which is that we need to have an industrial policy that does not rely uh, as a last measure on the Chinese government.
And so that said, the sacrifice would be, to some extent, moving faster towards a cleaner climate,
Correct. That's exactly right.
and that's the trade-off that's acceptable.
That's it's something that I think we can have both and. Your previous guest was talking about the zero sum game question, and I think that's true here too. It's it's too easy to say, well, it'll just be too hard, too long, more expensive. I'm not sure that that's the case. We have to test that assumption. We have to be willing to make those investments, and it's not just in the U.S. We need to have the courage to say, can we do this here? Can we do this with our allies? Can we do this in a way that builds up the supply chain and builds up uh, growth and economic development in lots of different places? And I think that's the case. So there will be more abundance rather than this mindset of restriction.
Dr. Seabrooks, I want to bring you into the conversation. Why did you want to bring Rohan Patel to UNF? This is part of a diverse perspective series that you host.
Yeah, so the Office of Public Policy Events hosts this Diverse Perspectives series where we focus on discussing and debating contemporary public policy issues and bringing in all kinds of different viewpoints on those questions. And there's really nothing I think that is more important to the future of both the United States and the world and the economy than energy policy. And I agree with Rohan that manufacturing, industrial production, these are going to be crucial. But I also think that we've seen an interesting shift in the way that energy policy gets discussed here in the United States. You kind of go back to 2008, and at least the public perception was that you had the Democratic Party that kind of stood for tackling climate change, subsidizing renewable energy, and then you had the Republican Party that was more kind of the drill baby drill type of mentality. And that was something that we saw throughout the Obama years and into the Trump years. And even when Joe Biden was running for president in 2020, he campaigned on not issuing new drilling permits for public lands. He campaigned on opposing the Keystone XL pipeline. He kind of came into office with that perspective, but very, very quickly, particularly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, um, there was a shift in emphasis of the Biden administration that I think has been interesting because of how unwilling they've been to tout the fact that U.S. oil production, U.S. Natural gas production is higher under Joe Biden than it was under Donald Trump. The U.S. is now a net exporter of energy and has been since 2019. And this kind of fits in with what the American people say they want out of energy policy, which is kind of an all of the above. They don't want to focus aggressively on reducing emissions at the cost of energy affordability. But at the same time, they recognize that green energy is becoming more competitive on price. And they think that the US should be pursuing an agenda of energy abundance. And so I think it's very interesting as we head into the 2024 election how the candidates will address the energy question and what direction we'll end up going in the next 4 years, given that the US has been able to kind of increase our energy supply, both by leveraging fossil fuels. The Biden administration eventually did start issuing permits for drilling on public lands. We've seen new pipeline construction, but at the same time, green energy has been growing and growing and becoming more affordable along the way as well.
But you see it as becoming less politicized? I mean, I saw a recent poll from Yale and George Mason University saying that support among conservative Republicans for clean energy has dropped from 54% to 24% in just the last 5 years.
I think you have to look at what's been happening in Washington. I think we're at a point where we've seen during the second half of President Biden's first term the ability of Democrats and Republicans to compromise on issues like permitting reform, for instance. So Republicans are very supportive of cutting red tape when it comes to fossil fuel permits. Democrats are very much in favor of doing the same thing when it comes to renewables. There's a point of compromise there where across the board we can say, we know we're headed to a clean energy future, but right now we have to make fossil fuels a part of our energy calculation. Goes back to the trade-offs that Rohan was talking about. We can compromise on that point, and the result is energy abundance across the board. You can see that with the Chips and Science Act as well. I think these bipartisan reforms that focus on improving energy production, making energy production easier across the board, supporting scientific research and technology across the board, that you can have bipartisan support for this.
And just briefly, Rohan Patel, the challenges keep coming, though. I mean, even as gains are made, the catastrophic impacts on climate from something like war is enormous. The fires in Canada have been an enormous setback in terms of carbon emissions. Do you have a single focus that you think is the priority in terms of trying to bring down the carbon emission on the planet?
Well, look, there's when Nick mentioned all of the above, when it comes to greenhouse gas abatement, we've got to have an all of the above strategy, industrial sector, agricultural sector, transportation sector, everywhere. But what's most important in terms of public policy dollars is using those in the most efficient way where you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, and also investing in research that allows us to scale those things going forward.
Rohan Patel will be speaking tonight at 7 p.m. at the John Delaney Student Union Ballroom. Rohan Patel, Nick Seabrook, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.